When I opened my eyes, the world was silent, like someone had pressed mute on life itself. The last thing I remembered was the sharp thud of my head hitting the stone steps outside my own home. Now, I lay on a hospital gurney, my wrists bruised and my body stitched up, while a nurse whispered on the phone, "He doesn't know, poor man." I sat up slowly, groggy, confused, until the word "deceased" caught my attention. The nurse left the folder open on the counter. My heart stopped. I got up, staggered toward it, and saw my own name printed across a death certificate, Nathaniel Granger. Declared dead. Cremated. Ashes handed to next of kin. Cremated. But I was standing right there, alive, breathing, trembling. I had to be in a nightmare. I checked the date. It had been 9 days since the fall. My children, Elijah and Maeve, had not only declared me dead, they'd staged a cremation. The doctor said I was found unconscious at the bottom of the hill behind my estate. No ID. No visitors. No name. They labeled me unidentified male, approximate 70. No one claimed me because no one wanted to. They had signed me off as dead and taken everything, my house, my accounts, even my antique car collection. I'd trusted them with the keys to my kingdom. Turns out, they used them to lock me out of my own life. Discharged with nothing but a hospital robe and a cane, I limped back to the edge of my old property 2 nights later. My gate code didn't work. Security lights flared. Inside, I saw them celebrating, Elijah drinking my wine, Maeve laughing with her husband in my library. My dog, Rufus, barked from the yard but was quickly shooed away by the new security guard. I was a ghost watching my own home, and no one even flinched. I stayed hidden in a nearby tool shed on a neighboring lot. Rain leaked through the roof, but I kept warm under a tarp and survived on crackers from a vending machine I found near the construction site. For days, I watched, listened, and learned. I overheard conversations, saw party guests marvel at how Elijah had inherited everything so quickly after my stroke. Maeve told a friend, it was peaceful, we scattered his ashes on his favorite lake. They even faked a memorial. Photoshopped my obituary. Sold my story like I was just another sad, aging man who faded away. But I hadn't faded. I was about to rise. The only thing more dangerous than a man with nothing to lose, is a man they already buried. I knew I couldn't walk into a police station. Not without ID. Not when Elijah had connections in law enforcement, and Maeve had married a district judge's son. If I claimed I was Nathaniel Granger, they'd call me crazy. Or worse, they'd make me disappear for real. So I became someone else, on paper. I found a homeless veteran named Cal who helped me get new clothes and introduced me to a man who forged documents. He said I looked like a weathered James Bond. I told him I needed more than a new name, I needed a new identity strong enough to undo everything they'd done. I spent the next few weeks living in the shadows, working day labor under the name Simon Keller, slowly building cash and gathering evidence. The twist? One of Maeve's old college roommates worked as an estate notary, and she knew the signatures on my will were forged. She had no idea I was alive, until I stood outside her car window at midnight, holding up my old driver's license and whispering, "I never signed that will." They murdered my name. She screamed at first. Then she looked closer. Her hands shook. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They said you died peacefully. There was nothing peaceful about this. My death was a theft. A betrayal. A declaration of war. And I wasn't just coming back, I was bringing their truth with me. Publicly. Violently. Poetically. Before you scroll away, please like, share, and subscribe if you want to know how I made them regret burying me alive. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I want to know how far my voice is reaching, because for too long, it was silenced. The smell of gasoline always reminded me of my garage, the one Elijah now kept locked behind biometric doors I paid for. I used to teach him about engines there when he was barely tall enough to peek over the hood. I gave him a name that meant strength. But all he gave me back was betrayal polished with a smile. As I stood in the alley behind my old estate, watching my own funeral photo hanging in the foyer, I wasn't just grieving the loss of my life, I was grieving the father I thought I'd been. Because if he could fake my death and stage a cremation, then he must have been planning this for a long time. I slept in a church basement for a few nights. Father Bill remembered me from the time I donated money for roof repairs. I told him I was Simon, not ready to share the full truth. But he looked at me with the same suspicion that nurses and clerks had, like I was half lost, half liar. It's incredible how quickly the world turns its back when your story doesn't come with paperwork. You become invisible. And the more invisible I became, the more clearly I saw. Maeve had always been clever, too clever. I remembered how she'd once said, "Every rich man needs a paper trail, and every paper trail can be rewritten." At the time, I laughed. But now, I realized she'd been rehearsing my funeral long before I fell. They'd moved quickly, liquidated assets, closed accounts, and filed an insurance claim, yes, even life insurance, one I forgot existed. Elijah had become the sole beneficiary just 6 months prior. Coincidence? I didn't believe in those anymore. The forger Cal introduced me to, Max, gave me a full identity: Simon Keller, born in Detroit, lived in Ohio, bounced around due to PTSD. It wasn't far from the truth. Max also handed me something far more dangerous: a tiny, discreet recording device and a GPS tracker. "You want revenge," he said. "Then make sure they never see it coming. Don't confront. Collect." So I did. Dressed like a delivery man, I dropped off a fake wine shipment at the Granger estate. Maeve didn't recognize me. I'd lost weight, grown facial hair, and walked with a limp. I said I was from Old Ridge Wineries, and while she signed the form, I placed the GPS under their SUV and a recording device behind the bar. 2 nights later, I listened to Elijah and Maeve argue over who deserved more, and how, if he ever shows up alive, we'll bury him for real. I played the audio over and over again, my hands trembling, but not with fear. With clarity. My first twist of revenge was small. I made anonymous calls to investors warning them of shady estate documents. Then I left a tip for the IRS about suspicious banking activity linked to Elijah's new shell company, Granger Holdings. The same company I'd once built under my name to protect our family's legacy. Within a week, I saw panic bloom on Elijah's face during a live-streamed charity gala. He smiled for the cameras, but his eyes were darting, sweat rolled down his neck. Something was working. But I knew suspicion wasn't enough. I needed shock. Proof. Something undeniable. I contacted the notary again. Her name was Amelia. She agreed to meet at a diner near the courthouse, wearing a hat and scarf like we were planning a heist. "They forged your signature," she whispered. "It wasn't even a good one. I kept a scan from the original you actually signed back in 2012. And Nathaniel," she reached into her purse, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. "I think they paid off the probate clerk." That changed everything. I didn't just have a forged will now. I had an accomplice within the legal system. Someone who could be blackmailed or exposed. And if they had the nerve to pay off a public official, then this wasn't just a betrayal, it was a criminal enterprise. But the biggest twist came when I returned to the hospital to retrieve the medical report from the day I was admitted. I wanted to see who signed me in as John Doe. I expected to see a nurse's scribble or an EMT's initials. But instead, there was a signature I recognized. My daughter Maeve. Under a fake name. She'd visited me. Knew I was alive. And still declared me dead. I leaned against the hospital wall, bile rising in my throat. She had looked into my unconscious face and chosen silence. She saw my chest rising. My heart still beating. And left anyway. From that moment, I stopped thinking of her as my daughter. She was something else now. Something cold. Something dangerous. Something I would burn down publicly, one secret at a time. I wasn't building a comeback. I was constructing an avalanche. And when it hit, it wouldn't just ruin their names. It would bury their lies forever. The memory hit me one night like a wave crashing through a locked door, loud, violent, and undeniable. It had been nagging at me, fragments floating just beneath the surface. The way the air felt that day. The odd silence before it happened. The smell of lavender on the breeze. Then it came back, clear as sunlight through broken glass. I didn't fall down those stairs. Elijah pushed me. I had been standing at the edge of the garden stairs, arguing with him about the deed transfer he wanted. I told him I needed time, said I'd consider naming him executor but not without legal counsel. His face darkened. He stepped closer. I remember the look in his eyes, flat, cold, and impatient. Then, just as I turned to walk back toward the house, I felt the shove. Sharp. Final. Like the closing of a casket lid. I tumbled. My head hit something hard, stone, maybe iron, and the world went black. And while I was unconscious, he cremated my name and pocketed my future. Now that I knew the truth, I didn't just want revenge, I needed justice. But justice didn't come easy when the world thinks you're ash in an urn. So I had to do what I always did best, plan quietly and strike hard. I started with the most dangerous thread, Maeve's visit to the hospital. I needed proof that she had knowingly lied. I returned to the security office under the guise of looking for a missing veteran. I gave them a story. My father had disappeared and might have been brought in as an unidentified patient. The security guard, an older woman named Janet, seemed sympathetic. I showed her the photo of myself, an old portrait with my golden retriever, Rufus, beside me. She frowned and said, "I remember this guy. He was here. Unconscious." Then a woman came in. She said he had no family and disappeared the next day. I kept my voice steady. Could I, maybe see the security footage from that day? She hesitated. Only for family. Or cops. I leaned in. That man in the photo? That's me. Her eyes widened. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she pulled up the files. We watched together. It was blurry, grainy. But unmistakable. Maeve entered the room, looked at my unconscious face, placed a hand on my chest, then calmly walked out and never came back. Her betrayal wasn't a moment, it was a decision. A conscious, heartless decision to leave her father for dead. Janet turned to me slowly. Do you want me to burn this to a disk? No, I said. I want 10 copies. With that footage, I had my first weapon. But I needed more. So I contacted Amelia again, the notary who'd been part of the estate transition. I told her everything, the forged signature, the hospital footage, the memory of Elijah pushing me. She stared at me, stunned. Then she said something I didn't expect. Nathaniel, you're not the only one they've erased. She handed me a file with a name, Andrew Bell. Elijah's former business partner. Apparently, Andrew had sued Elijah years ago for embezzlement. The case was buried. Settled quietly. But Amelia had the paperwork. The signatures looked identical to mine, sloppily forged. I think Elijah's been doing this a long time, she whispered. You were just the biggest obstacle. That night, I found Andrew Bell. He was living in a one-room apartment above a pawn shop downtown, his career destroyed, reputation in shambles. When I told him who I was, he laughed. You're supposed to be dead. I replied, apparently, I missed my own funeral. He poured us whiskey and told me everything, how Elijah had drained company accounts, blamed him, and paid off a crooked auditor. Andrew tried to fight back but couldn't match Elijah's influence. Your son plays dirty, he said. He smiles while he ruins you. I smiled back. Then it's time someone showed him what it feels like. The next morning, I used Andrew's help to gather old corporate filings and cross-reference them with the forged estate documents. Same pen pressure. Same fake notary stamp. Same corruption pattern. My dead hands were suddenly full of living ammunition. But the final piece came from someone I hadn't expected, my housekeeper, Ramona. She'd worked for me for over 20 years. I found her at her sister's home across town, where she'd moved after Elijah fired her without cause. When I knocked on the door, she opened it, saw me, and dropped the tray she was holding. "Senor Nathaniel," she whispered, crossing herself. She let me in and burst into tears. "They said you were gone. I knew something was wrong. I saw Elijah delete the security footage. He told the staff you had a stroke in your sleep. But I heard him say on the phone, he won't wake up again, just move forward." I wanted to say something, but they threatened to deport my nephew. I hugged her. For the first time in weeks, I felt real warmth. And with it, I knew, I had people. I had truth. And now, I had proof. I wasn't dead. But their peace was about to be. There's a particular kind of rage that builds when you see someone smile over the grave they dug for you. That night, I stood less than 30 feet away, hidden among hedges I once planted with my bare hands, watching through the wide dining room windows as Elijah and Maeve toasted their newest real estate acquisition. It was my vineyard. They'd renamed it Elysian Fields and claimed it was inspired by my legacy. Ironic, considering they were drinking wine made from the last batch I ever oversaw, pouring it into glasses engraved with in loving memory of Nathaniel Granger. My son lifted his glass and said, "To new beginnings." My daughter-in-law replied, "And permanent goodbyes." They clinked their glasses and laughed. I tightened my grip on the garden shears I carried, not for violence, but for symbolism. Those hedges I once pruned with love had grown wild in my absence. Just like them. I needed a public reveal, something undeniable, something that would grip the town by the throat. But not yet. I had to time it right. So I watched them, night after night, like a ghost taking attendance at their downfall. They had no idea their private estate had become a stage, and every lie they whispered became part of my script. Ramona, my housekeeper, helped me more than I could have dreamed. She gave me access codes Elijah forgot to change, and I slipped into the pool house one night, my old sanctuary. Inside, I found a box he'd forgotten to toss. My journals, receipts, signed documents, my real handwriting. My signature. It was everything I needed to contrast the forgeries. But then I found something else. A USB drive labeled simply, "Dad." My hands shook as I plugged it into an old laptop and watched the contents load. Videos. Dozens of them. Hidden recordings from my office. Maeve, sitting at my desk, rehearsing her testimony for probate court. Elijah, practicing his tearful story about discovering my body. "Make it sound personal," she told him in one clip. "Say you found him with a book in his hand. He loved reading. The judge will eat it up." Elijah smirked, then said, "Right. Something poetic. Maybe throw in that he was reaching for the Bible." They both burst into laughter. I stopped the video. I felt like vomiting. The idea that they'd rehearsed mourning me, like it was a school play. Not grief. Not love. A performance for profit. The next morning, I took the USB to Amelia. She watched the footage and turned white. "This isn't just forgery," she said. "This is conspiracy. If we bring this to the DA, they'll bury them." "Not yet," I said. "We do this my way. Publicly. Loudly. So they can't twist the story." I contacted Andrew Bell. We met in the back room of a laundromat, like something out of a crime novel. He smiled when I showed him the USB. "You're not just coming back from the dead," he said. "You're building a resurrection with fireworks." Together, we drafted a plan. A press release, a legal claim, and an invitation. Yes, an invitation. You see, Maeve was organizing a public fundraiser at the town hall in my honor. A Granger Memorial Charity Gala. The irony was nauseating. But also perfect. We hacked the RSVP list, added a new name, Simon Keller, Vineyard Consultant. I even listed myself as a silent donor. Max, the forger, helped me print an ID badge that looked official. I had a crisp suit, dyed hair, and tinted glasses. Nobody would recognize me, at first. But when the night came, and the lights dimmed for the opening tribute video, everything shifted. The screen showed my face. Soft music played. Elijah took the stage. "My father," he began, "was a man of honor. A man of wisdom. We lost him too soon." I stepped into the back of the hall as he spoke, heart pounding. I waited. And then I walked forward. People gasped. Some screamed. Maeve dropped her champagne flute. Elijah's words froze in his throat as he stared at me like he'd seen a corpse walk in wearing a tuxedo. I walked up the aisle. Slowly. Purposefully. Then I spoke. "I heard someone mention I'm dead. That's strange. Because I still seem to have breath in my lungs. And a few questions." Gasps turned into murmurs. Phones came out. People recorded. Maeve tried to shout, "Security." But no one moved. Elijah stepped forward. "This is a mistake. That man is." I pulled out the USB and raised it in the air. "Before you try to lie again, maybe you should remember that the dead don't stay buried forever. And they come back with proof." The crowd erupted into confusion, reporters snapped photos, and I saw the beginning of what I'd been waiting for, the unraveling. Because I hadn't just returned from the grave. I had returned as a storm. The room had the atmosphere of a funeral colliding with a courtroom. Half the guests stood frozen, clutching their wine glasses like lifelines. The other half had their phones up, capturing every second of the spectacle. The man they'd come to honor, the supposedly deceased Nathaniel Granger, was standing before them, very much alive, holding a USB drive like it was a dagger. Elijah's face twisted into something unfamiliar, panic. Not the kind you show publicly, but the kind that coils behind the eyes when your lies are about to collapse. Maeve tried to pull him off the stage, but I stepped forward and snatched the microphone from its stand. "Good evening," I said, my voice steady, cold, and clear. "I apologize for interrupting the eulogy, but as the man supposedly cremated and scattered across Lake Wyndham, I thought it only fair to speak on my own behalf." Dead silence. "My name is Nathaniel Granger. You may recognize it from the obituary printed in this town's paper. You may have donated tonight in memory of me. You may have even cried while Elijah and Maeve told you stories about how peacefully I died in my sleep." I paused. "The only problem is, I never died. I was pushed. I was left for dead. And while I lay unconscious in a hospital with no name, my children staged my funeral, forged my will, emptied my accounts, and declared me dust." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back muttered, "Is this real?" I turned to Elijah. "You remember the garden steps, son?" I asked. "Because I do now. I remember your hand on my back. I remember you telling me to stop clinging to control. Then I remember falling." Elijah tried to interject, stepping toward the mic. "This man is delusional, he's an imposter. I have hospital footage," I said calmly. "I have signed documents. A USB drive filled with videos of you rehearsing your lies. Forged signatures. Bribed clerks. Paid off staff. And I have one more thing, son, public attention. I handed the drive to the local reporter from Channel 8, who had started live streaming when I walked in. "Broadcast it," I told her. "The people deserve to know what these two did to their father." Maeve finally spoke, her voice trembling but sharp. "You're unwell, Nathaniel. You suffered a head injury. None of this is what you think." I turned to the crowd. "Let me ask you all something. If I were truly unwell, why did they claim my body without a death certificate? Why stage a cremation without a coroner's report? Why cash a life insurance policy within 4 days?" Elijah had gone pale. He knew the timeline would expose him. And just then, a new voice entered the chaos. Amelia, the notary, stepped forward, holding documents. "I'm prepared to testify under oath that the will was forged," she said. "The real one was signed in 2012, and Nathaniel never named Elijah or Maeve as sole heirs." Then came another blow. Andrew Bell appeared beside her. "Elijah's been stealing for years," he said. "I lost everything because of him. But now, he loses too." I looked at Elijah. He looked back at me with venom, but there was something else in his eyes: recognition. The moment he realized the lies he'd built brick by brick were collapsing like rotted wood under a storm. The gala was over. The guests poured out in whispers and waves, stunned and divided. Some offered hugs. Some just stared. But most watched the Granger name crumble in real time. No more sympathy posts. No more tragic son stories. Just truth. The police arrived 30 minutes later. Maeve tried to claim harassment. Elijah claimed mistaken identity. But with Amelia's documents, the footage, and witness testimonies lining up, the officers made no arrests, yet. But they opened an official investigation. And that was the beginning of the real war. That night, I sat in a quiet diner on the edge of town, sipping black coffee while my hands still shook. Ramona sat across from me, smiling gently. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said. "I started it." Because the public reveal was only the first step. The legal fight, the media storms, the peeling back of every layer of lies, that was still to come. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was the storm walking back through the door they tried to lock. The courthouse echoed like a tomb the morning I walked through its front doors. Everything smelled like old wood, dust, and quiet judgment. Only this time, I wasn't being buried, I was bringing the dead back to life. My name was on the docket. State of New Hampshire versus Elijah Granger and Maeve Granger, charges pending investigation, insurance fraud, forged documents, attempted unlawful cremation, and potential attempted manslaughter. I stood outside the courtroom, dressed in the same suit I wore to my last real birthday, before they'd taken everything. Ramona sat beside me, her hand steady on mine. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "You already exposed them." I shook my head. "Yes, I do. They buried my name in a system that would have let me disappear. If I stay silent now, it's like letting them finish the job." Inside, the hearing was supposed to be procedural. Just paperwork, a judge reviewing motions. But nothing stays quiet when a man declared dead walks in and takes the stand. The courtroom rustled as I entered. Elijah and Maeve sat at the defense table. Maeve wore all black again, as if still mourning. Elijah looked exhausted, thinner, like someone whose lies had eaten him from the inside. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is that the Mr. Granger?" "My legal name is Nathaniel Granger," I said clearly. "Though I've been walking around as Simon Keller since my own children filed a death certificate behind my back." You could have heard a pin drop. My identity was stolen, not by strangers, but by my blood. And if not for a lucky delay in hospital processing, I might have never woken up to tell you any of this. My attorney, a young but razor-sharp woman named Clara Jennings, handed over the packet we'd built, hospital security footage showing Maeve identifying me as unclaimed. The cremation order signed within 48 hours. Forged signatures on a will notarized by Amelia's now recanted colleague. Even a transcript of Elijah rehearsing his fabricated eulogy. This wasn't a mistake, Clara told the judge. It was a conspiracy, executed in stages, designed to ensure Mr. Granger never re-entered his life. The defense squirmed. Elijah's lawyer stood up and argued mental instability. Said I was confused. Delusional. Possibly pressured by outside parties. That's when I dropped the final piece. I remember the shove, I said, eyes locked on Elijah. I remember his hand on my back. I remember telling him he wouldn't get the house deed that day. And I remember his exact words, "You're too old to hold a kingdom, Dad. Let someone young take the throne." Then he pushed me down those steps. Elijah flinched like I'd slapped him. The judge leaned forward. "You're claiming attempted murder." "I'm claiming truth," I said. "And if the court wants to call it by its rightful name, so be it. I didn't need them to be arrested that day. Not yet. I needed the court to unseal my identity. I needed the system to recognize that I was not a ghost. That I was the man they tried to erase." The judge ordered a temporary hold on all estate transfers, froze the Granger trust accounts, and launched a formal inquiry into the death declaration process. He also scheduled a criminal hearing for the following month. Elijah didn't speak once during the entire session. But Maeve did. As I walked out, she followed me into the hallway, flanked by her lawyer. "You don't have to do this, Nathaniel," she hissed. "Think of your legacy." I turned to her slowly. "Legacy?" I said. "You held my obituary in one hand and a wine glass in the other. You didn't just bury me, you toasted to it." Her face went pale. That night, I sat in Andrew Bell's cramped office, the air full of papers and printer ink, as he grinned and pushed a document across the desk. "What's this?" I asked. He tapped the top line. "The old Granger holdings. We bought it back. Legally. Through shell companies. Elijah used it for laundering. It's now yours again. Name and all." I stared at the paper. My old company. My name. Back from the dead. "You sure we don't wait?" I asked. Andrew smiled. "Sometimes, resurrection doesn't need permission." The media had caught wind of everything by the next morning. "Local man declared dead returns to expose children in court," splashed across every screen. Reporters camped outside the estate. Former investors began pulling out of Elijah's side businesses. Maeve's online followers, she ran some lifestyle brand now, started turning on her. But the best part? The insurance company began an internal fraud investigation. Which meant the money they stole was about to become evidence, and liability. They thought they were smart. Sophisticated. Untouchable. But they forgot one thing about declaring someone dead. If he comes back, the whole world will listen. They say the dead can't testify. That ghosts don't press charges. But I wasn't haunting Elijah and Maeve from the shadows, I was hunting them in broad daylight, in full view of the world. And the best part? They were unraveling without me having to lift a single finger. It started small. Their charity sponsors began pulling out after the courthouse footage hit the evening news. Donors didn't want their names tied to a dead man's scam. Then Maeve's precious lifestyle blog, where she once shared tips on grief and healing after my death, was flagged for misinformation and suspended. That alone might have been enough poetic justice. But I wasn't done. I moved into a small cottage on the edge of town that once belonged to an old friend of mine, Leon, a retired journalist who had always admired my integrity back in the day. When he found out I'd been declared dead by my own children, he dropped his whiskey glass and said, "Hell, Nate, this is bigger than a comeback. This is a reckoning." Leon helped me craft the next part of my return, not in court, but in the press. We published an op-ed in the Sunday paper titled, "I was declared dead by my own children." Here's what they took from me. It was raw. Brutal. Honest. I wrote about waking up alone. About being erased. About watching my own urn filled with someone else's ashes. I didn't write to seek pity. I wrote to show the world how betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes, it comes from the ones who kiss your forehead goodnight. The article went viral. I was invited to speak on radio shows, podcasts, even a national morning news segment, though I declined that one. I didn't want to become a spectacle. I wanted to stay sharp, focused, quiet, until the moment they fell. And fall, they did. Elijah's real estate empire started to shake. The IRS followed the tip we planted, years of inconsistent filings and hidden assets unraveled. 2 of his employees flipped under pressure, offering emails and bank statements that showed exactly how he funneled money from my accounts. Even worse for him, one of those employees was his personal assistant and lover. Maeve had no idea. Until I told her. I didn't say it cruelly. I left her a letter, typed, anonymous, but unmistakably informed, detailing the dates, the wire transfers, even screenshots. I ended it with, "He betrayed you before you betrayed me. Now you get to feel what it's like to be erased." She didn't show up to the next court hearing. Her lawyer appeared instead, looking flushed and scattered, and requested a delay due to Maeve's emotional state. I almost laughed out loud. The investigation gained speed. And as it did, I noticed something unusual. Elijah had begun showing up in public alone. Always with his head down. Never speaking to reporters. No more big speeches. No more smirks. He was cornered. And when rats are cornered, they start chewing through everything around them to escape. Which is why, when a private investigator contacted me one evening, I wasn't surprised. He told me Elijah had hired him to dig into my current identity, Simon Keller. "I know who you really are," the man said. "But I'm not interested in helping him. You've got a story that deserves to end right." He gave me access to Elijah's emails, collected over months. There, I found the smoking gun, a draft letter to the insurance company, prepared days before my supposed death. It explained that, in the event of a sudden loss, Elijah would need immediate access to funds for funeral expenses and legal matters. It wasn't a request. It was a setup. Dated 2 days before he pushed me down the stairs. That was all I needed. The final nail. I brought the letter to Clara, my attorney. She read it and said, "This isn't just premeditated fraud. This is conspiracy to commit financial homicide." Then she looked up and added, "Nathaniel, are you prepared for what happens next?" I nodded. "I've already buried my old life. This is just the exhumation." By the time the next court hearing arrived, the judge had approved a motion to pursue criminal fraud charges. The insurance company had already filed suit to recover funds. The estate was frozen. Their accounts locked. Their assets in limbo. But what I wanted most was still ahead. Not money. Not even an apology. I wanted to stand in the courtroom, face my son under oath, and ask him one question. Why? Why erase me? Why silence the man who built your life? Why turn blood into business? That moment was coming. I could feel it in my bones. But I knew Elijah. He wasn't going down quietly. He'd rather burn the whole house than surrender it. And I was ready to watch him light the match. The irony is, I never needed to bring Elijah down. I just needed to step out of the grave he dug for me and let him trip over the headstone. And that's exactly what was happening. Elijah was spiraling. After the insurance company froze their payout and began legal proceedings to recover the money, he started liquidating assets to cover legal fees, cars, stocks, even a private boat he docked under a shell company's name. The press got wind of everything. Articles popped up with headlines like, "Heir to Granger Estate under fraud investigation after father returns from the dead." Social media turned brutal. Once beloved posts from Maeve's lifestyle blog were reshared with mocking captions, "How to mourn a man who's still breathing." But it wasn't just the public that turned on them, it was each other. I heard through Leon, who still had contacts in media circles, that Maeve and Elijah had separated. She was living in a hotel downtown and had retained her own lawyer. Apparently, she felt misled by Elijah, claimed she was unaware of the forged documents and only acted in grief. Grief. The same woman who poured my favorite bourbon over her manicured nails and called it a tribute. I didn't believe her for a second. But I didn't need to. She was splitting from Elijah. And that meant division. Weakness. Leverage. Amelia, the notary, reached out one evening and told me Maeve had scheduled a private deposition with the DA's office. "She's turning," Amelia said. "Probably to save herself. She'll hand them everything to reduce her sentence." Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to scream. Because the people I had loved most in this world weren't just trying to erase me, they were willing to erase each other when the fire got too close. Still, I waited. Because the courtroom would be my final battlefield. A week later, I received the official notice: the state had filed criminal charges. Fraud. Forgery. Insurance theft. And under consideration, attempted manslaughter. It wasn't just a hearing now. It was a trial. And the trial date had been set. March 2nd. That day would mark exactly 1 year since the day Elijah pushed me down the steps and left me to rot. Fitting, isn't it? I spent the days leading up to the trial in silence. Clara reviewed every document. Andrew Bell helped prepare witness statements. Ramona, bless her heart, agreed to testify. She remembered the day Elijah fired her and threatened her nephew. She remembered hearing him say, "He won't wake up again. Just move forward." I visited the church where I'd once slept after my discharge from the hospital. Father Bill hugged me like I was a war survivor. Maybe I was. A different kind of war, sure, but one where the wounds were invisible and deeper than any blade could ever cut. "You've already won, Nathaniel," he said. "The truth is out." "No," I replied. "The truth is just the beginning. Justice is the end." Then, the twist I didn't expect. Elijah showed up at the cottage one evening. No warning. No lawyer. Just him, tired, unshaven, hollow-eyed. Ramona was outside feeding the chickens and screamed when she saw him. I opened the door. "You've got 5 seconds to leave." "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I'm here to talk." I stood in the doorway. Didn't move. He looked down, then up again. "They're going to put me in prison." "They should." Maeve flipped on me. "I know." He took a long breath. "Why are you doing this?" That made me laugh. Really laugh. The kind of laugh that starts in your chest and dies bitter in your throat. "You pushed me down a flight of stairs, Elijah. You forged my will. You staged my death and scattered someone else's ashes pretending they were mine. And you're asking why I'm doing this?" His face fell. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I didn't mean for you to die." "That's not how this works," I snapped. "You don't get to decide what your betrayal meant. You decided I was disposable. That my life was over. You wanted my money more than my presence." He didn't argue. He just nodded once, like a man accepting the weight of his own fall. "Do what you have to do," he said. But I had to say it. "I'm sorry." Then he turned and walked away. I didn't call out. I didn't follow. I just stood there, letting the silence crawl over my skin like dust settling on old wood. Was he sorry? Maybe. Did it change anything? Not a damn thing. The morning of the trial, the sky was gray and heavy, like the earth itself was holding its breath. I stood outside the courthouse in a dark wool coat, staring at the building that had once declared me legally dead. That paper, filed by my own children, had erased everything, my legacy, my property, my voice. But today, I was walking in through the front doors, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as the man who refused to stay buried. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, former business associates, curious townsfolk, all eyes hungry for spectacle. Elijah sat at the defense table, suit pressed, but his jaw clenched so tight you could hear his teeth grinding. Maeve, separated now, sat 3 seats away, her lawyer whispering into her ear. She wore the same expression she had at my fake memorial, composed on the outside, calculating underneath. I didn't sit. I stood behind my lawyer Clara, ready. The judge entered, the courtroom rose, and then the trial began. The prosecution opened with a calm but devastating statement: this case is not about a financial misunderstanding. This is about betrayal, deliberate, orchestrated, and cold. The victim isn't just Mr. Granger's estate. The victim is Mr. Granger himself, who stands before you now, because he survived. Then came the parade of proof. Amelia testified about the forged will, about the signature that didn't even match his grocery lists. Ramona described Elijah's threats and how Maeve warned her to stay quiet unless you want to lose more than your job. Andrew Bell took the stand and testified to Elijah's long history of financial deceit, fraud, and quiet intimidation. Then came the tech expert, who authenticated the USB files containing video of Maeve and Elijah rehearsing my eulogy. The courtroom played the footage. Maeve, say he was reading the Bible. They loved that. Elijah, what about? He died peacefully in his sleep, holding a photo of Mom. Maeve, perfect. Make sure you cry just before you say that line. You could hear gasps. One woman in the jury box covered her mouth. Elijah looked down, his face darkening with every word. Maeve sat stiffly, her hands balled into fists. When the prosecution rested, Clara turned to me. "It's time," she said. "Are you ready?" I walked slowly to the stand. The courtroom held its breath. I looked out at the jury and spoke plainly. "My name is Nathaniel Granger. I'm 70 years old. I built my life from nothing, just calloused hands and long nights. I taught my children to be strong, honest. I gave them everything I had. But what I didn't realize is that I raised them in a house that valued inheritance over integrity." I paused. 1 year ago, I stood at the top of the garden stairs, arguing with my son over a deed transfer. I said no. He smiled. Then he pushed me. I woke up in a hospital with no name. They said I had no visitors. No family. I was John Doe, a ghost with a pulse. I leaned in closer, meeting every juror's gaze. And while I lay unconscious, they declared me dead. Faked a cremation. Staged a memorial. Emptied my accounts. Sold my company. Spoke to you all with tears in their eyes, tears they rehearsed. They didn't mourn me. They replaced me. Maeve's lawyer stood to object, but the judge let me finish. This trial isn't about money. It's about betrayal. It's about a system that almost let me vanish because no one thought to ask why 2 adult children would cremate their father within 48 hours, without a single family visit or hospital ID check. I'm lucky. Most people buried alive don't come back. I did. And I'm asking you to show them what it means to face the dead. I stepped down. The silence afterward said more than any cross-examination ever could. In closing arguments, the prosecution made one last appeal: Elijah and Maeve Granger didn't just defraud a system. They desecrated a relationship. They took the sacred bond of family and turned it into a contract. And now, that contract has consequences. The jury left for deliberation. I sat by the window in the hallway, watching raindrops streak down the glass. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt no weight in my chest. Not peace. Not yet. But release. Elijah walked by with his lawyer, didn't look at me. Maeve did. Just a glance. No hatred. No apology. Just emptiness. Maybe that's what betrayal leaves behind in the end, not anger. Just a hollow space where love used to be. 2 hours later, the jury returned. The foreman stood. We, the jury, find Elijah Granger and Maeve Granger guilty. When the word left the jury foreman's mouth, guilty, you could feel the oxygen shift in the room. Elijah didn't move. He just sat there, stone still, like the verdict hadn't reached his skin yet. Maeve flinched. Her jaw tightened and her fingers clutched the edge of the table, like she was bracing for a storm she never thought would land. But it did. The judge, a seasoned woman with no tolerance for theatrics, thanked the jury and ordered both defense teams to prepare for sentencing hearings. The fraud charges alone were enough to carry multiple years in prison. The forged will. An additional felony. And the attempted manslaughter accusation, while not proven beyond a reasonable doubt, still remained on record. Pending further investigation, she said, eyes narrowing on Elijah. I didn't smile. I didn't raise my fist or nod at the cameras. I just breathed. For the first time in nearly a year, I allowed myself to fill my lungs with something close to peace. But peace is fragile. Especially when the guilty still have cards left to play. 2 days later, Clara knocked on the door of my cottage with an envelope in her hand. They're appealing, she said. On technical grounds, claiming emotional distress, unfair media bias, the usual garbage. I sighed. Let them appeal, I said. All it'll do is remind the world who they really are. But then she hesitated. There's something else, she said. You need to see this. She handed me a copy of a legal motion just filed. From Maeve. She's suing you for defamation and emotional damages, Clara said. I blinked. She's suing me? She's claiming your public statements, your op-ed, your media interviews, destroyed her business and led to multiple panic attacks. I stood there in stunned silence. It was like someone had shoved me back down those steps all over again. She lies, steals, fakes my death, and then, what, plays victim. Clara nodded grimly. That's exactly what she's doing. She's using the court system now to change the narrative. Not to win, but to stay relevant. To stay seen. That's when I realized, this wasn't about money anymore. Not for her. It was about power. Control. And reclaiming her image. We countersued. Clara filed a response supported by evidence, testimonials, and expert analysis showing how Maeve profited from my fake death. We included screenshots from her grief brand posts, sales figures that spiked after my memorial gala, and her own words, my father-in-law's passing taught me so much about healing and reinvention. She was profiting from my silence. But now that I was speaking, she couldn't handle the echo. And Elijah? He tried his own tactic. From jail, he released a letter through his lawyer. A public confession, filled with apologies and spiritual clarity. In it, he blamed his actions on years of unresolved grief over my wife's passing. He painted himself as a wounded son, lost and broken, desperate for closure. I read the letter twice. Then I fed it into the fireplace. Because real grief doesn't push its father down the stairs. Still, the public was divided. Some saw me as a hero, resurrected and relentless. Others began to echo Maeve's version, that I was an angry, vengeful old man who was ruining his family over paperwork and inheritance. That was the price of truth. It doesn't always come with applause. But I didn't need applause. I needed closure. And I was close now. So close I could hear it in the rustling trees behind my cottage, in the crackle of the old record player I'd salvaged from my storage unit, one of the few things Elijah hadn't touched. Then, one night, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But when I did, the voice on the other end said, "Mr. Granger, you don't know me. But I'm a private caregiver who worked briefly for your son before the trial. I think there's something you should see." "What is it?" "He kept a journal. A physical one. It's in the crawlspace beneath the estate. No one's claimed the house yet. But I saw it. It's detailed." "Detailed how?" "He wrote about what happened. About you. About the stairs." My pulse quickened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he said something that chilled me," the caregiver whispered. "He wrote, it wasn't the fall that killed him. It was that he trusted me to catch him." I hung up, heart pounding. There was more. More truth. More buried secrets. And I wasn't done digging. I broke into my own house at 3:17 a.m. The place stood empty now, no more lawyers or realtors, just dust and ghosts. Elijah hadn't paid the taxes. The bank was circling, waiting to claim what was left. The security system had been cut off for weeks. They'd gutted the soul of the home, and now they were letting the shell rot. But I wasn't there to mourn it. I was there to find the journal. The crawlspace was behind the laundry room, hidden beneath a wooden grate I'd installed decades ago myself. I pried it open with a crowbar and dropped into darkness, flashlight clenched between my teeth. My knees cracked, my back screamed, but I pressed forward through cobwebs and cold concrete until I saw it, a black leather book, wrapped in an old Granger holding sweatshirt. I pulled it out, hands trembling. I didn't know what I expected. Guilt? Rage? Remorse? What I found was far worse. Page after page filled with dates, observations, calculations. Elijah had chronicled everything. The decline of my health. The medications I was on. The timeline of the deed transfers. Even predictions about how long he'd have to maintain grief optics before filing for tax exemptions on the estate. He had written my death like a business plan. And there, on the final page, scribbled in dark ink, was the line the caregiver had quoted, "It wasn't the fall that killed him. It was that he trusted me to catch him." I stood there in that crawlspace, the air too thick to breathe. Not because of dust, but because of truth. It confirmed everything. Not just intent. But malice. Premeditation. He hadn't acted out of fear or panic. He had acted because he could. Because I let him. Because I trusted the boy I once carried on my shoulders to never break the man who built his world. I took the journal straight to Clara. She read it in stunned silence. "This is a gold mine," she said. "But also, a horror story." "It's not just proof," I told her. "It's the final nail. He didn't just defraud me. He planned the moment he ended my life as I knew it." With the journal in hand, the prosecution filed a supplemental motion, new evidence pointing directly to intent, possibly tipping the scales toward attempted murder charges. The judge ordered a new hearing. I didn't care how long it took. I'd wait another year if I had to. Because this time, they couldn't spin it. Couldn't shift blame. Couldn't rewrite the ending. But that wasn't all I had planned. I reached out to Leon again. He helped me get an interview with the Sentinel, the region's most respected news magazine. Not some flashy podcast. Not tabloid fluff. A real investigative piece. And I gave them everything, the footage, the documents, and now, the journal. The piece ran under the title, "Buried Alive, the True Story of Nathaniel Granger." It wasn't just a media hit. It was a cultural earthquake. Letters poured in. Messages from people across the country, other parents cut off by greedy children, victims of inheritance fraud, widows who'd been gaslit and silenced. You gave me my voice back, one woman wrote. I thought I was the only one. Another said, I watched your son speak at your memorial. I believed him. I'm ashamed. But I'm proud of you. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was revelation. And as I walked through town, alive, visible, I saw it in people's eyes. Not pity. Respect. Maeve tried to hold on a little longer. Filed an injunction. Claimed the journal was fiction. Said Elijah had been emotionally unstable. But the courts weren't buying it. And neither was the public. Then came the biggest twist yet. A quiet email. From a burner account. No signature. It said, there's a second bank account. Cayman Islands. Under Elijah's middle name. It holds the offshore assets. He didn't tell Maeve. The login ID is under the old boat registry. Password hint, he'll never find this one. I didn't know who sent it. But I knew what to do with it. We subpoenaed the account records. And what we found confirmed the full extent of his betrayal. Over $7 million in assets tucked away offshore. Moved there during the weeks following my death. The money came from liquidated investments, shell company transfers, and even sales of fake Granger estate antiques. He was preparing to disappear. Run. Erase the rest of me. But he forgot one thing. The dead don't stay dead forever. Sometimes, they dig themselves out, one chapter at a time. The courtroom was silent when the Cayman Islands account records were submitted into evidence. Elijah wasn't present, he'd waived his right to attend that hearing. But Maeve was. She sat stiffly beside her attorney, visibly rattled. Her mask of poise was cracking at the edges. When the clerk announced the total, $7 million hidden offshore under a false identity, the entire room shifted in collective disgust. Clara stood tall and firm, holding the printed transaction history high for the judge and jury to see. These funds were transferred within days of Mr. Granger's alleged death. The signature on the request? Forged. The routing cleared through a company Elijah created 3 months prior, presumably in anticipation of his father's sudden passing. The judge asked one question, was this account disclosed during discovery? No, Your Honor, Clara replied. In fact, it was actively concealed. The judge's gavel came down like a hammer splitting bone. That, ladies and gentlemen, is fraud compounded with intent to flee justice. I will be recommending federal investigation for international financial crimes. The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scrambled to update headlines. One whispered, he's done. Completely finished. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Because I knew what was coming next. Elijah had reached the edge of the cliff, and now, finally, gravity had caught up. Back at the cottage, I sat alone with a glass of scotch. I hadn't touched a drop since the night I fell, but this wasn't celebration. It was remembrance. I stared at the fire crackling in the hearth, letting the warmth touch the cold places inside me that even justice hadn't thawed. He'd tried to steal everything I had. My identity. My home. My dignity. And when that wasn't enough, he tried to vanish with the money that was meant to carry my name forward. But he didn't count on one thing, I remembered who I was. I wasn't just a man. I was a father. A builder. A survivor. And now. I was the story. The next day, Elijah's attorney issued a public statement. Mr. Granger is cooperating fully and will enter into a plea agreement. Translation. He knew it was over. Maeve, cornered by evidence and betrayal from her own husband, tried one last move. She offered to return a portion of the assets in exchange for dropping her civil suit against me. Clara didn't even blink. No deal, she said. Your client defrauded her father-in-law and orchestrated public deception. She'll answer for it in court. We filed a separate motion to seize her profits from the Granger Grief brand, money earned on the back of my supposed death. The judge approved it. Every dime she earned from lying would now help fund elder protection and fraud victim education. I created the fund myself. Named it the Resurrection Trust. Every headline called it poetic. But to me, it was just necessary. One evening, as spring rolled in and the wind lost its bite, I returned to my old house, not to reclaim it, but to walk through it one last time before the bank officially resold it. The grass had grown wild. The paint peeled in places I once tended every summer. But the bones were still mine. I walked the halls slowly, fingers brushing the walls, memories echoing in each step. In the study, I found a single photo still hanging, me, Elijah, and Maeve, 20 years ago, standing in front of the vineyard on opening day. I took it off the wall. Turned it around. On the back, in my wife's handwriting, were 5 words, "Family is what you build." I sat down in that empty room, photo in hand, and cried for the first time since waking in the hospital. Not because I'd lost everything. But because I'd found something else. I found the truth. I found the courage to face it. And in doing so, I built something stronger than wealth. I built myself again. I didn't reclaim the house. I let it go. Some ghosts aren't worth exorcising, they're better left behind. I handed the keys back to the bank and signed the final papers with no hesitation. That house had once held every corner of my legacy, until it became a mausoleum for betrayal. I didn't need it anymore. What I needed now was peace, and that wasn't made of bricks or stained wood floors. Instead, I used a portion of the assets we recovered to buy a quiet patch of land just outside town. Nothing fancy, just a weathered barn, a cottage with creaking steps, and a field with space for new vines. The vineyard I'd once built with my hands had been sold off during my death, renamed and gutted. But here, I'd start again. I named it Second Harvest. Ramona came on as caretaker, her nephew helped too, a kind soul with hands that respected the soil. Andrew Bell offered to co-invest, saying he wanted something real to grow after years of being robbed blind by Elijah. Even Amelia stopped by, arms full of wildflower seeds and homemade bread. "I thought maybe this place could use something soft," she said. I smiled. I think we've all earned a little softness. The headlines began to fade, as they always do. The country moved on. Another scandal took its place. But I didn't mind. I hadn't come back to be famous. I came back to be whole. And then, the sentencing day arrived. Elijah pled guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. Maeve took a separate deal, no prison time, but 5 years probation, a lifetime ban from managing estates, and financial restitution to the Resurrection Trust. It wasn't the punishment I'd envisioned in my darkest moments, but it was justice. Tangible, undeniable, public. I sat in the gallery as Elijah faced the judge one last time. He wore the same suit he'd worn to my memorial. Only this time, there were no cameras flashing for him. No applause. No crocodile tears. The judge's voice was steady. "You robbed a man not just of his assets, but of his identity. His dignity. You convinced the world he was dead so you could rise from his ashes. But Mr. Granger did something you didn't count on. He came back." Elijah didn't look at me as they led him away. That was his final gift. Silence. After the courtroom cleared, Maeve approached me in the hallway. Her eyes were sunken, makeup carefully applied to a face that no longer knew how to lie without cracking. "I'm sorry," she said. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, the woman who'd once smiled at my table, laughed at my jokes, and buried me with a wine glass in hand. "I believe you're sorry," I finally said. "But not for what you did. For the fact that you lost." She flinched. "I don't forgive you," I added, voice low. "But I'm done letting you live in my head." She nodded, took a breath, and walked away without another word. And just like that, it was over. The storm had passed. The wreckage cleared. What remained was mine to rebuild. Back at second harvest, the vines had started to bloom. Not many, not yet. But enough to remind me that growth doesn't need to be fast to be real. I walked the fields each morning, hands in the dirt, skin kissed by the sun. I was no longer Nathaniel Granger, the man who came back from the dead. I was just a man who survived. And planted something new. Spring melted into summer, and with it, the weight I'd carried for a year began to lift. At second harvest, the vines pushed up from the soil like survivors, resilient, stubborn, reaching toward light without apology. Much like me. Every morning I'd wake early, before the heat rolled in, and walk the rows barefoot. There's something holy about the earth when it forgives you for coming back. I'd run my fingers along the leaves, whispering to myself, not prayers, not wishes, just quiet promises, you're still here. You're still growing. You're still yours. The first bottle of wine from the new vineyard wouldn't be ready for years, but that didn't matter. I wasn't rushing. I had time now. Time they thought they'd stolen. Time I reclaimed with every breath, every page of my new journal, every memory I let back in, not to hurt me, but to teach me. Leon came by often, always with something in his hand, a clipping, a visitor, or just a story. One day he brought a woman named Lillian, whose husband had recently passed. Her stepson was trying to evict her from the house they shared for 40 years. He says I'm old and forgetful, she told me with tears in her eyes. He says I won't remember. You'll remember, I told her, placing a hand on her shoulder. And I'll help make sure the court does too. I connected her with Clara. A few months later, her stepson backed down. Quietly. Legally. She sent me a bottle of homemade plum jam with a note, "Thank you for being a lighthouse when I felt lost." I kept that note on the wall beside my desk. Not because it flattered me. Because it reminded me why I came back. Not just for vengeance. But so others could follow my footsteps out of the dark. Ramona planted roses along the east fence, red and wild, climbing toward the sun. They bloom with fury, she said with a grin. Just like you. Andrew Bell visited one afternoon with news. Granger Holdings, the shell Elijah used to funnel money, had officially gone bankrupt. The name was being dissolved by court order. We could rebuild it, he said. Start fresh under your terms. Make it clean. Real. I shook my head. I don't want the old name, I said. Let it die. I'm not resurrecting ruins. I'm building something better. He nodded. Then let's do that. And we did. Together, we formed a new company, Granger Root and Vine. It would serve as an umbrella for the vineyard, for future land restoration projects, and even for elder fraud support services, funded directly by Maeve's restitution payments. Yes. You heard that right. Every bottle we sell will pour out of the very justice she tried to avoid. That's what I call real irony. Then, in late July, something happened I didn't expect. A letter. Handwritten. Postmarked from the penitentiary where Elijah now served his sentence. It read, "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. And I know you don't want to hear from me. But I see your face every time I wake up. Not from guilt, at least, not just guilt. From grief. I grieve the man I was supposed to become. The one you believed in. The one I buried long before I tried to bury you. They say you're growing grapes again. That you started over. I don't know how. But maybe that's the difference between us. You plant things. I tried to burn them. I hope one day I can do something good again. Your son, if that word still means anything, Elijah. I read it 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer, not to forget it, but to remind myself of what happens when a man turns love into leverage. It wasn't time for reconciliation. Maybe it never would be. But it was time for truth. And that letter, however twisted, was a start. I went out to the field that evening. The sky burned pink and gold. I knelt in the dirt, planting the last vine of the season. I whispered, "Grow through what they tried to bury." Then I stood up. And walked forward. Because that's what survivors do. Summer rolled toward autumn, and the vines at second harvest stood taller than ever, leaning into the wind, breathing sunlight. Every time I walked through the rows, I imagined they were whispering to me. Not in words, but in feeling. You were meant to rise. I'd planted them from broken roots. Just like myself. People began to visit the land more often. Not tourists, truth seekers. Women like Lillian. Men like me. Survivors. Betrayed. Silenced. Some had lost homes to greedy children. Some had signed documents they didn't understand until it was too late. But they came here for something more than legal help. They came to see what survival looked like when it took root. We built a garden behind the cottage, open to anyone who needed quiet. Ramona tended it like it was a cathedral. She added signs beside every tree, engraved with words chosen by those who visited. I am still here. You don't get to erase me. Truth doesn't rot. People began leaving notes under rocks, folded prayers in the branches, drawings from grandchildren who believed their grandmothers were warriors. And they were. One morning, I found a man sitting near the back fence, staring out into the fields. He looked about my age, rough hands, sorrow in his eyes. I brought him coffee and asked if he was all right. They told me I was too old to fight back, he said quietly. That I should just accept it. My daughter forged my name on the deed to my land. Took everything. Do you have a copy of the signature? I asked. He reached into his coat and pulled it out. I looked at it, and my stomach turned. It was almost identical to mine. Same slant. Same pressure. He whispered, "They said no one would believe me." I met his eyes. I do. That afternoon, Clara added him to our growing list of cases. We weren't just planting vines anymore, we were planting defense. Justice didn't have to be loud. It just had to be consistent. We started small clinics, workshops in the barn on how to recognize elder fraud, what to sign, what never to sign, how to set up digital alerts. The media picked it up again, but this time, there were no flashy headlines. Just quiet respect. They called me the man who came back to save others. I didn't want that title. But I earned it. Elijah remained in prison. Occasionally, I'd get another letter, shorter each time. Less desperate. More thoughtful. The last one said, "I can't undo what I did. But I'm trying to understand why I ever thought it was right. Your vineyard, it's in my dreams sometimes. That scares me. I hope that means something." I hadn't replied. I still wasn't sure if I ever would. Some bridges aren't crossed. Some are just observed from a safe distance. Then came the Harvest Festival. We didn't call it that publicly. We called it the First Press. Just a gathering, people from town, families we'd helped, old friends and new ones. Ramona cooked enough food for 50 people. Andrew Bell gave a speech. Leon told everyone the story of how he thought I was a ghost the first time I knocked on his door. I stood up at the end. Held a bottle of the first barrel from Second Harvest, unlabeled, imperfect, but real. This bottle, I said, isn't about grapes. It's about time. About dirt. About loss. About coming back when no one thinks you will. I held it up. To every person who's ever been erased. You're not gone. You're growing. There wasn't applause. Just silence. Deep and sacred. Afterward, a young boy approached me. Couldn't have been more than 10. Are you really the man who came back from the dead? I crouched down and smiled. No, son. I'm the man who made sure no one else would be buried alive again. His mother, standing behind him, wiped her eyes. That moment was worth more than every dollar Elijah ever tried to steal. I wasn't just living again. I was teaching others how to rise. The first frost arrived quietly, the way all endings do, without a bang, just a thin shimmer across the fields at sunrise. I stood on the back porch of the cottage with a mug of black coffee, watching as the vines at second harvest settled into winter's hush. Leaves curled like tired hands, but beneath the soil, I knew the roots were still alive. Waiting. Holding strength in silence. Much like I had, all those months in the shadows. A letter arrived that day. This time, not from Elijah. It was from Maeve. It was short, 4 sentences, carefully written in her unmistakable cursive. Nathaniel, you may never forgive me, and I understand. But I want you to know I've sold everything. I'm starting over in a city where no one knows my name. Not to escape, but to try and learn how to live without lies. If I become someone better, it will be because of the way you stood tall when I tried to bury you. Maeve, I sat with that letter for a long time. Not because I didn't believe her. But because, for the first time, I didn't need to. Forgiveness was no longer about her. It was about me. Letting go of the acid that had lived in my chest for over a year. And I realized. I wasn't angry anymore. Not empty, either. Just, released. Later that week, we officially launched Granger Root and Vine with a public dedication. People from across the region came. Survivors, attorneys, advocates, families who had once been too ashamed to speak about what had been done to them. They spoke now. Openly. Fiercely. We unveiled a stone monument just past the garden fence. On it was engraved, "What was stolen shall be replanted. What was silenced shall be sung." Dedicated to those who came back from being erased. Some wept. Some just touched the stone and closed their eyes. All of them understood. Elijah sent one final letter. This one felt different. Quieter. No justifications. No confessions. Just a single quote from something I once told him as a boy, when we built a treehouse in the backwoods and he dropped a hammer on his own foot. Pain teaches. But only if you listen. That was it. No signature. I didn't reply. But I did carry that letter to the tree line and buried it beneath a sapling we'd just planted for spring, an almond tree, the first of its kind on the land. Not to honor him. But to mark the end of something. Closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes, it's dirt on a folded piece of paper. A shovel turned one last time. That winter, I hosted a solstice dinner for our little circle, Ramona, Andrew, Leon, Clara, and Lillian. We ate at a long reclaimed wood table beneath strings of soft amber light. No fancy speeches. Just laughter. Good food. The kind of silence that warms you instead of chilling you. Clara raised a glass. To Nathaniel, she said. The man who wouldn't stay dead. I lifted mine and shook my head. No, I said. To all of us. The ones who came back stronger. That night, I sat in my study, lit only by firelight. The old portrait of my family, Elijah, Maeve, and me, still hung on the back wall. I didn't take it down. I didn't frame over it. I just let it be. A reminder of where I came from. Of what was lost. And what was rebuilt. Because they may have faked my death. But I resurrected something far more lasting than legacy. I found my soul again. By midwinter, the vineyard slept under a blanket of frost. The vines bowed their heads beneath the weight of snow, yet I knew, deep in those roots, life waited. That was the thing about survival. It didn't always look like power. Sometimes it looked like stillness. Like patience. Like choosing peace when the world taught you war. I received an invitation in January, unexpected, handwritten, and embossed in silver. The New England Restorative Justice Conference keynote speaker invitation recipient, Mr. Nathaniel Granger. I read it twice, not because I doubted it, but because part of me still struggled to believe that my story, the one they tried to bury, was now being asked to stand as a beacon. I hadn't sought fame. I never wanted to become the man who came back from the dead. I just wanted my life back. But maybe that's exactly why the story mattered. Because it reminded people that dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you reclaim. When I arrived at the conference weeks later, I stood backstage, heart thudding like it did the day I walked into my own memorial. Only this time, I wasn't there to interrupt a lie. I was there to tell the truth. The host introduced me as a man whose legacy was stolen, erased, then rebuilt, stone by stone, word by word. I stepped onto the stage to a standing ovation I never expected, and took the microphone with the same calm I'd once used to prune a stubborn vine. I was declared dead, I began, my voice steady. But what they didn't know was that I still had breath. And where there's breath, there's resistance. And where there's resistance, there's rebirth. I told them everything, not the dramatic headlines, but the quiet details, what it felt like to wake up in a hospital bed nameless, to stand outside your own home while your children toasted your ashes, to realize the people you loved most in the world thought you were worth more as a memory than a man. But I came back, I said. And I didn't come back for revenge. I came back for truth. And once I found it, I used it to rebuild not just a life, but a purpose. The crowd rose again. Not out of pity. But solidarity. Because I wasn't alone anymore. After the speech, dozens came to speak to me. Older men with trembling hands. Women who'd been written off by their children. Advocates, attorneys, survivors. They thanked me, not for what I said, but for still being here to say it. That night, I returned to the cottage and found a surprise waiting, a crate on my doorstep, marked from the Office of Restitution and Recovery. Inside was a check. The final payout from the seized Cayman Island account. A letter included detailed how every penny had been recovered, and that restitution had been fully enforced. The number didn't matter. What mattered was that the last of what was stolen had finally returned. And I no longer needed it. I took a portion and donated it to a new scholarship fund we'd created, one dedicated to teaching estate literacy and fraud prevention. I named it the Quiet Vine Grant. Because what grows in silence still matters. I walked the vineyard that evening, snow crunching beneath my boots. The sky stretched violet above me, and the moon cast long shadows over the rows. I stopped beside the stone monument we'd built and laid my hand on it. They had written my ending. But I turned the page. And found I still had chapters to write. The snow melted slowly that March. By the end of the first week, tiny green shoots pushed up through the black soil like small rebellions, signs of life refusing to stay buried. Every vine at second harvest, every bud on every branch, felt like a word I wasn't allowed to say a year ago. Alive. Still. Growing. And then came a knock I never expected. I opened the front door one morning to find a woman in her early 30s standing there, her coat dusted with frost, her eyes uncertain but warm. She clutched a folder to her chest like it held something delicate. "Are you Mr. Granger?" I nodded. "My name is Annabelle," she said quietly. "I'm Elijah's daughter." My breath caught. He'd never told me he had a child. She must have seen the confusion on my face. My mother was someone Elijah dated years before Maeve. I didn't grow up with him. He didn't really acknowledge me until I was older. He reached out a few years ago. Tried to fix things. I stepped aside and invited her in. My hands were shaking. She sat down on the edge of the armchair by the fireplace, never putting the folder down. I read about what happened, she said. I watched your speech at the conference. It's strange, watching someone tear down their father and then see that man rebuild himself stronger than ever. I waited. Then she handed me the folder. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. Elijah's script. Different from his earlier ones, this one was worn, the ink smudged in places like he'd cried while writing it. Dad, this is the last letter. I won't send more after this. I've accepted that forgiveness may not be something I receive. But I wanted you to know I've been working with the prison outreach program, talking to young men who think power comes from inheritance and shortcuts. I tell them my story. Not to clear my name, but to show them where the road ends. Annabelle found me. She deserved better. I hope I'm at least giving her something honest now. I asked her to bring this to you because I want her to see the kind of man I should have been. The one who rebuilt after the fire. You didn't just survive. You created something no one can steal again. And if legacy means anything, I hope that's the part one passed down. Elijah, my throat burned. I looked up at Annabelle. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. She simply said, I wanted to meet you. I needed to. I nodded slowly. I'm glad you came. We talked for hours. She told me about her life, books she loved, jobs she'd worked, dreams she held. She never asked for money. Never asked for anything. Just connection. And I gave it. Because blood doesn't have to come with expectations. Sometimes, it simply asks for a seat at the table. That spring, Annabelle returned every few weeks. She helped in the garden. Brought her mother once. Even stayed for one of our workshops on estate protection, taking notes, listening with fierce attentiveness. One afternoon, she stood with me by the vines and said, It's strange. I never really knew my father. But I feel like I'm getting to know the man he betrayed. And somehow, that's helping me understand myself. I didn't answer. I just took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. Because healing doesn't always need words. And for the first time, I saw it, not just in her, but in myself. This was the chapter no one expected. The quiet one. The one not about courtrooms or vengeance or shame. But about continuance. Because even after all the loss, the world kept turning. And this time, it turned in my favor. By the time summer came around again, Second Harvest was no longer just a vineyard, it was a refuge. People didn't come to see a miracle man anymore. They came to see what healing looked like in real time. They came to sit under the almond tree I planted over Elijah's final letter. They came to write their own stories in the garden guest book. They came because somewhere in my voice, they found their own. That's when the news came. The state legislature had voted to pass a new bill, the Granger Law, a direct result of my case. It required stricter ID verification in death certifications, mandatory waiting periods before estate changes, and protections for vulnerable elders in probate. The law was born from the ashes of my betrayal. I stood at the signing ceremony with Clara, Amelia, and Ramona beside me. Leon snapped photos for his paper, his voice cracking as he called out, "Smile, Lazarus." I did. Not for the camera, but for what the moment meant. They tried to write me off in ink. I rewrote the law in stone. Later that week, I hosted one final harvest dinner before fall. The barn was strung with lights, laughter echoing in the beams, wine flowing from the first proper labeled bottle of Second Harvest's vintage. I didn't give a speech. I didn't need to. People already knew the story. They had lived it with me. As the guests lingered and the night settled into a soft hush, Annabelle joined me at the stone monument beneath the moonlight. She brought a single glass of wine and sat cross-legged on the grass like she belonged there. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked softly. "Elijah?" She nodded. I looked out at the rows of vines, strong and swaying in the breeze. I missed the boy I thought he was. The man he could have been. But not the one who pushed me. She took a long breath. I think I'm still figuring out how to love someone who failed so many people. You don't have to love him, I said. You just have to learn from him. She nodded slowly, like that truth was something she'd been waiting to hear. After she left, I sat in the garden alone. The wind shifted, and somewhere deep in the branches above me, I heard the soft creak of a tree settling. No ghosts. No memories. Just the sound of something old making peace with the wind. And in that stillness, I made a quiet decision. Tomorrow, I'd visit him. Elijah. In prison. Not to forgive. Not to reconnect. But because closure doesn't come from waiting for the other person to change. It comes from knowing you've changed so deeply, they no longer have the power to define you. I stood up, looked out across the field of vines, and whispered, I made it. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Before I begin this final chapter, if you followed my journey from the day I woke up with no name to this moment of peace, I want to thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe to support stories that speak for those who've been silenced. And tell me in the comments, where are you from? I want to know how far my voice has reached. Now let me tell you how the story ends. The prison was gray, cold, and humming with the sounds of locked lives. I hadn't seen Elijah in nearly a year. And I hadn't planned to. But something in me needed to sit across from him, not for revenge, not even for answers. Just to finish the story with a truth only we could share. He was thinner. Paler. But not broken. Not defiant either. Just quiet. They led him into the visitor's room where I sat alone, no glass between us, just a battered table and time. He sat down slowly. No words. I nodded once. Hello, Elijah. He stared at the table. Did you get my last letter? I did. I meant it. I know. He looked up. So why are you here? Because you buried me, I said. And yet I came back. And I need you to see what that looks like, with your own eyes. Not through a letter. Not from behind the walls you built. He swallowed hard. I didn't come to forgive you, I said. I came to free myself. Because whether I carry you as a son, or as a scar, I refuse to carry you in silence. He nodded. I understand. We sat in silence. Two men. One past. Two futures. I started a fund in your name, I said. Not to honor you. To teach others about what happens when greed poisons love. It's saving people, Elijah. It's doing what you couldn't. For the first time, he looked me in the eye. I'm glad, he whispered. You turned the ruin into something real. I never knew how. You could have learned, I replied. But you wanted shortcuts. And shortcuts always cost more than they promise. I know, he said. And I live with it. Every day. I stood up. I hope that one day, I said, you'll grow something with your own hands. Even if it's just a single flower in the dirt behind these walls. Because if you can do that, maybe some small part of you will find what I found. What's that? He asked. I turned back one last time. Peace. And I walked out. Not because I needed to. But because I could. Back at Second Harvest, the vines swayed in the summer wind. Annabelle had begun helping full-time now, starting a community gardening project under the east slope. Ramona was teaching workshops on estate literacy. Clara visited often. And the vineyard's first real batch, the Resurrection Blend, sold out in under 2 weeks, each bottle carrying a note. This wine was made from soil once touched by betrayal. Now it tastes like truth. I didn't reclaim my old life. I built a better one. I didn't erase the past. I grew around it. And when people visit now, they don't ask how I survived. They ask how they can, too. So I tell them, you rise by inches. By mornings no one sees. By truths no one claps for. And one day, without realizing it, you become the thing they never wanted you to become. Free.